And welcome everybody to another episode of the Most Important Conversations. I'm here today with September Dorman. As always, September, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today. It's been a rainy 3 days here in Florida, and I just love the rain. So I'm on cloud nine right now.
Yeah, I love rain too. Well, you look fabulous. And we're
Thank
also
you.
here with our guest today, Jeff Arthur. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I am living the dream, and I just want to say that I will stand up for all of the people who do not like the rain and prefer the sunshine and, prefer days where you can get out and go play rather than the rain and the storms and whatever. So I will fight the good fight against you two and win, but that's a whole other issue, a whole other subject. So
Now,
not
we
what
need a little bit of both anyway. And hey, listen, this is an interesting way to segue into it. We're having a conversation about values today, and you just told me what you value. You value sunshine in September, values rain. And isn't it interesting how that, by the way, September, if you value rain, I'm not sure why you're in Florida.
Because we have rainy seasons. That's why.
I guess you do. Yeah, you get hurricanes. That's true. Yeah, you get lots of rain. What am I saying?
Hurricanes are fun where I'm at. It's just a bunch of wind.
Yeah. So Jeff, let's dive into it. You've been someone who has I don't know, spent a number of years, I guess, focused on this topic of values and values being important. You work with companies and organizations and leadership teams to establish a common value system in their organization. That seems to be something that you feel is almost sort of like at the epicenter of what impacts the trajectory of a company. But it's not just companies. I mean, it's communities of people, right? I mean, as people, we all have values. Share with us a little bit your sort of definition first. When let's make sure we're aligned and we're talking about the same thing here. When you talk about values and you're working with these leaders and these executives in different companies, how do you explain it to them?
I think there's a lot of different definitions out there, and they're all, most of what I've heard are good definitions. For me, the core values are that which I stand on. That which is most important to me. That which is guiding my decisions, guiding what is important to me, what I do, what I don't do, what I participate in, what I don't participate in, how I act in certain areas, how I don't act, who I interact with. I value X or I value Y or whatever that is. And I interact with people or I don't interact with it, but it always comes down to this is what is most important to me and what is a driver in my life, whether I realize it or not. And most people don't realize that it's driving people and driving what they're thinking and driving what they're deciding, which is part of what we want to do, is try to pull that out where it's more understood and recognized and understanding the impact that it has in my life.
Yeah. Now, I was just going to go there actually with you around the whole idea that I don't think most people are really that connected to their values, at least consciously. I mean, it's certainly a driver under the surface subconsciously. But I think if you went and just randomly polled people on the street, what are your most important values or what do you value most? I think you'd stump them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Chad, that we don't really connect how the values affects our feelings. For in other words, if I value fairness and I see something happening with groups of people or individuals, or how someone treats a child or how a spouse or significant other treats one another, if I see something I don't like that, I don't realize it because I value fairness. That's creating anger, that's creating frustration, that's creating irritation. I don't think about why does that bother me so much. And we all have areas in our life where things bother us more than other stuff. Oh my gosh, that hacks me off. Oh my gosh, I can't stand people who do that. Or I can't. Why? Where's that coming from? And a lot of times it comes from what I value, and I don't realize that at all. Yeah, I don't make those connections internally at all.
If you look a lot at a lot of what's going on right now in the world, we're in a interesting period in human history right now, where a lot of the systems and structures that we've come to rely on for decades now, at least since the Second World War, are being rethought, in some cases completely challenged and tore down. And there's a lot of sort of crunchiness out there, a lot of fighting, a lot of anger, a lot of fear, a lot of different things, and we're seeing it kind of spill out. You just have to turn on the daily news and you're going to see some of it. And so what you're saying is that what people are not getting is because they're not connected into and tuned into what they value, then they end up fighting about the topics. If we could get people starting to talk about what they value, we might actually find that we may even value the same things, and that becomes a different place from which to start a new conversation.
That's exactly right. I think that a lot of people value either the same thing or something that is very similar to one another. Whether I value trustworthiness and you value honesty, that's very similar. Whether I trust or whether I value fairness and you value justice, that's workable. There's all kinds of things that we value that bring us closer together than what we realize. And I think there's a ton of overlap that people don't recognize, don't understand, and they don't realize how that's affecting everything. They're just getting caught up in the emotional baggage, and away we go. The mob mentality takes over, and away I go. And I don't think beyond that at all.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about in TMIC and the whole life architecture work is we talk about how perception is reality, right? And so values, what's the relationship from your perspective between values and perception?
That's a great question. It depends on whether I understand my values or not. If I understand what my values are, that's going to greatly affect my perception of stuff. If I don't understand what my values are, it's going to affect the perception, but I'm not going to understand how, and I'm not going to recognize the depth of that perception. And I keep thinking about September, and the example whenever I was first part of the TMIC group, and we were on one of those calls early on when I was first joining the group, and September had went through the values conversation assessment. You remember this call, and I had no idea who September was, but I used her as an example of how in our assessment, for people who don't know, we talk about what you value most in three big areas of people's lives: my personal life, relationships, and in the business world, regardless of what business I'm in. And in September's case, September valued honesty in all three arenas, which is very rare. Whatever that, not that people don't value honesty, but that they value the same value in those three arenas. And it was the very first value that she identified in all three areas: personal, business, relationships. Honesty was number one. And I used her as an example about how people who value that, who have the same value in those three arenas, honesty is the most important thing. She cannot not be honest. She doesn't know how to lie. Her head would explode if she lied. She doesn't know how to deal with people who lie. The quickest thing you can do to end any kind of interaction with September is lie to her. As soon as you lie, she has no idea what to do with you other than drop you through a hole into some kind of abyss and walk away from you, because she doesn't know what to do with you, because she can't deal with it, because she can't lie. Honesty is the most important thing. Is September, am I wrong so far?
Not at all. Not at all.
It drives. So think about that. The value of honesty drives everything about what she perceives in relationships. It drives what she perceives in business. It drives what she sees in herself. That perception is driven by the honesty. But while she would have said before she did the assessment, yeah, I'm an honest person, would you have, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't know, September, if you would not have realized how big honesty was for you until that was pulled out.
I didn't realize that it was that important. It's just part of my makeup. So it's
right.
You don't think about something that's natural to you. So until you pointed it out to me, then I could see the connections and how I have dropped relationships, because I just firmly believe if you're not honest, how can you resolve anything? If you're in business and you're not being transparent and clear and honest, what your truth is, it doesn't have to be the truth, but just what your truth is, you don't have a starting place. You're just creating this fictitious idea of what something could be if you're not starting from a place of honesty. Same thing in relationship. How can you grow with your partner if you're not being completely and totally honest with them? There's nothing else to do if you're not being honest.
So, Chad, I present case study number 1, September Dorman.
Well, it's a good case study.
Your perception.
Yeah, no, it's a good case study because, and I want to come back to the values conversation in a few minutes, but let's keep going here with sort of September as a bit of an avatar. I mean, not everyone is going to value honesty. So it's an example, right? It's an example of how understanding what your core values are help you understand why you have the things you have in your life, why you have the people that you have in your life. And behind that, which is the question I was asking a few minutes ago, and I want to ask you, September, about this in a second, which is what is the relationship between values and perception? Because perception is the way that we gather data from our outer environment. And based on that data, we're unconsciously, for the most part, making decisions, binary versus choices, because to make choice, you need to have a much wider perspective to have more than just 2 options. Sure. So we're making decisions based on what we're going to do today. That could be how I'm interacting with someone. It could be what I'm going to have for dinner. It could be what I do for a job. It could be, any number of things. And the majority of people, 95% of what they did yesterday, they're going to do again today, and so on and so forth. So the value system is underneath it informs, I should say, and creates a context for the perceptual filter in terms of what am I letting in my life as information, as data that's important to me. So in the case of September, honesty is a value of hers. So your perceptual filter, September, is going to be letting in data that is important for you to evaluate whether someone is honest or not honest. And this is all happening in the background. So let me ask you a question. When you went through the values conversation with Jeff and you became aware that honesty was one of these key values, these core values that you have, how has it affected the way you've gone about your day? Like you now have an awareness that honesty matters. It was always there. It was always impacting your perceptual filter before, but you weren't aware of it. And so you were probably, when you were making decisions, you would make them, but you wouldn't kind of know why. Has that changed now that you have that understanding? Is it like something you're really intentional about when you interact with people or you're in circumstances?
Well, 2 things came to the surface for me. One is I'm so easy to deal with because all you have to do is just be honest with me, and I can handle direct. I prefer direct communication. I was talking to Colin recently. He goes, well, I want, I was asking for feedback. He goes, sometimes I can be super brutal. I go, but I like it like that because I don't have to question anything. I'm so clear. And so I've intentionally looked for people that, or I've noticed that I really connect easier in a deeper connection when somebody's just brutally honest. But right there. And then it's also given me grace to not everybody has honesty as their number 1 value. So I got to give other people grace and use discernment, really leaning into my intuition. How does this feel? Does something feel off here? And paying more attention to those pieces. So yes, it brought some really beautiful awarenesses about myself and how I interact with people.
Now, let me ask you another question on honesty, though. When I think of honesty, it's like basically I have to interact with someone, and usually it's what they're telling me I can then verify. I mean, that's how I know they're being honest, right? It's verifiable. That's not always the type of interactions that we have. I mean, like if you just meet someone for the first time, you're not likely going to be able to verify anything. You're at a conference or a dinner meeting or something, and they're talking to you and they're telling you whatever they're telling you about their life or what they do or whatever. You have no idea if they're being honest with you or not, or do you now? So how do you assess that out? And I guess this goes, Jeff, to the values conversation process that you lead people through. There's not any just one value that we're operating from. So September, there might be other ones. Were there other ones when you worked with Jeff that are sort of related to honesty, that, okay, I don't know if you're being honest with me, but you're being this with me, or I'm sensing that or whatever, and that, tweaks these values for me? Like it's kind of a formula, isn't it?
I'm going to let Jeff answer that formula question. and
Okay.
how those work together, because I'm aware of values. We have them just as a background operating system, but I'm not sure how they connect and how one supports the other and if one takes over. But to answer your question about, you don't know when somebody's being honest with you. However, if you pay attention to how the person is being, there's a lot that can be disclosed in how people are being energetically. So that's, again, where I lean into my intuition and I let go of anything that's going on here in my head, any thoughts. And it's almost like you step into that space of emotional sobriety where you're just kind of neutral to what the feelings are, and there's no judgment to what you're feeling, but you're paying attention to, oh, something feels off about what they said. Maybe their body language shifted a particular way, or their demeanor changed, or maybe how they're communicating, that point of over communicating or little indications, and paying attention to that, but really leaning in. And if something doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. And I trust that. Yeah.
All right. So Jeff, let's go to that then. Let's talk about the formula of the values the assessment. You take people through it. We have many different types of values. Talk to us a little bit about, how do these things work together? It sounds a bit alchemical in a way.
Well, if I'm understanding your question correctly, going back to your example of, you don't know if they're telling you if they're being honest with you at the conference or whatever, the answer is no, you really don't. And September gave you a great answer of, you become more aware of what is important to you, and you can catch that energy, and and it kind of helps answer the question a lot of times where we've been around people and there's something about them I don't like, or that doesn't connect with me, and I'm not really sure why. And maybe sometimes this answers the question, but I want to be careful with the people that are listening. It's not about the value of honesty. That was just her example. For you, Chad, your values, creativity was the value for you that showed up in more than one arena, and that's unusual. Also, I want people to understand most of the time the values don't necessarily overlap. If they do, it's about intensity. In other words, how important, really deep it is for you. Honesty is as a value that's very important to September. But as I look at her values conversation, and I'll come back to your specific question, she also, on a personal level, values personal growth, peacefulness, and unconditional love. Those are all very important, but honesty is super important. For you, Chad, you're a creative person. You don't know how to not think outside the box. You're going to find the solution. You're going to creatively identify or recognize or solve or create or put together or find the people who think like that as well. And it's always back to the pattern of, if I'm understanding your question, what is important to me is going to drive what I'm doing, thinking, interacting with, how I'm solving the problem, what I'm doing, what I'm not doing. And even September herself said a while ago, I was doing this, but I didn't realize it. That's the power of the blind spot, both positive and negative. Oh, I don't realize I have this problem, the power of the blind spot. Oh, I didn't realize how important this was to me, the power of the blind spot, and how that affects the perceptions that we all deal with, struggle with, and can lead us and affect us and pull us down and lift us up and interact with all that's going on in our life as well. What the values conversation does is very, very, very simple. Both of you have been through it. Whenever I say simple, I don't know that I can overemphasize the word simple. It's very easy. It's very simple. And yet it draws out a ton of information where it helps people identify, this is what is most important to me in these three arenas: personal, business, and relationships. And then from the values conversation, we help people identify who they are from those values and what they're doing with their life. And it becomes, again, very simple, but very powerful, because now I begin to understand this is who I really am as a human being. And this is what I stand on, and this is what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really about up-leveling an individual's awareness and then the impact that can have on the other people they interact with, especially in the context of teams. And I know that you did the values conversation assessment with all of the TMIC team as well. And what was interesting, if I recall, was how incredibly aligned the values were of the TMIC team. I don't know if that's unusual or not. You'll have to tell me that, but this is sort of a lead into my question is when you work with organizations, and if they have the alignment or they don't have the alignment, if they don't, I'm assuming that what you then do is you try to get them to see how their values can connect. And in some cases, it might be a situation where, is there ever, I mean, this is sort of a two-part question. Is there ever a situation where you'll be working with the leadership and you'll be like, so-and-so's values are just not aligned with this organization, and in which case they may have to be let go because it's not a fit?
So the first part of your answer, first part of your question is yes. This helps people and teams and organizations begin to realize how similar they are. The second part of your question, I never make a recommendation on letting somebody go, but what I do is say, okay, Chad, so you understand, September's values are way different than yours. Part of understanding what we value, it translates almost immediately into how I communicate with people. Once I understand, oh, September values this, that's what is important to her. That helps me communicate with her from a whole different perspective. That helps me understand what she's going to hear, or what is going to translate to her, or what is going to impact her, or what is going to stimulate more excitement or growth or whatever with her. When I understand what she values, even if it doesn't align with me, now I understand how to connect with her better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, is there opportunities where situations where it's like, oh my gosh, you know what? I don't know that this can fit. Sure. But what most of the time happens in those situations is like, you know what? That explains why September never really fit into the picture, or that helps explain why Chad was always struggling to connect, why we couldn't really connect with this, because it's not right or wrong. There's no judgment on the values. It's just whether there's alignment or whether there's not.
Right.
And if it's not, is there a way to connect with that? Or is it better for us to help you or help them find a place where they can connect and really start to thrive? Because I don't know that that's going to happen here.
Yeah. Yeah. And for our listeners and viewers, not all of what someone will value is always, I guess, deemed positive. I mean, there are people in the world who value things that aren't what we would call positive values. I mean, they might be, I'm just thinking of some of the stuff that's going on in our society right now. Is that true, or do you look at values all coming from?
So what I instantly think of, Chad, is that we can value a lot of the same things, but it's how it manifests.
I see.
Through other belief systems and through other cultural influences. So, for example, I did a podcast a couple of years ago with Richard Levick, and we were talking about how at that time there had been multiple, and for those of you who don't know who Richard Levick is, Richard was a global crisis counseling and litigation law firm. He owned that kind of law firm, and he talked about how at the time there were, and even more so now, but it had just happened 2 or 3 times whenever we did the podcast, where there were these huge, massive company where they had been hacked. And you had the group over here saying you have to pay us X amount of millions of dollars, or we're not going to leave, you can't have the information, etc. But what we talked about was how these groups had openly identified that they valued growth. So if you paid them the money, what they were doing is that they were taking the money and they were upgrading the systems. They were making it easier for them to steal your money. They were improving their systems to destroy your life because they valued growth. They valued enterprise. They valued, all the things that you and I would go, this is really good stuff.
Right.
Until you put it in the hands of a guy who wants to steal whatever he can from you because of the cultural impact in his life. And now you got a whole other ballgame. But it was interesting how they valued a lot of the same things that other people would value, but it was manifesting in a whole other arena of life,
Mm,
a whole other side of the coin that people would normally say, I don't want to operate there at all.
that's interesting. And I asked the question because I think sometimes people can get confused with values versus how it manifests, like you were saying, certain actions or behaviors or things like that, right? September,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it certainly brings a lot of clarity to behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You don't understand why somebody's behaving a particular way. Look at all the chaos that's going on in the world. You said several times, Chad, we just have a bunch of toddlers running countries that have all these
Emotionally, anyway, yeah.
yes, emotionally, yes. They're just throwing tantrums and
Yeah.
disposing people to fight
Well,
their
absolutely. So let's think about what's going on in the world today. You've got pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian forces that would both tell you that they value truth, that they value fairness.
And life. They would probably say life, right?
They absolutely would say we
Yeah.
value life.
Yeah.
We value, all these things, and yet the behaviors are at exact opposite extremes of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And realizing, wait a minute, you guys value the same stuff. There's ways to figure this out if we can get past the emotion, if
That's
we
right.
can get past the emotional control and actually begin to figure stuff out on a much deeper level, which most people, unfortunately, right now are not willing to do. But they still, you could still argue they share the exact same value.
Yeah. Brings us right back to a conversation September and I are having all the time about emotional sobriety. Is like, I still swear it's the superpower of the next century. If we can actually get enough people to, the work that you're doing, Jeff, is you're elevating and raising the awareness. And that's why I think it's so complementary. Incidentally, you're raising awareness inside of people, inside of companies and organizations, which are just communities of people. So it's people about values, what they value. And one of the core principles in the TMIC work as well is the emotional sobriety, because it's all well and good to know what your value systems are, as you're pointing out. But if you don't have any emotional sobriety, you're still going to be a walking reaction in defense of your values.
That's not only exactly right, but I would add to that. I mean, you said that perfectly, but I would add to that, whenever I understand what my values are, that is what can, in my opinion, in my observations, that's what can really catapult me to understand begin to understand my emotional sobriety, and recognize what is it that has been triggering this emotion, and who am I really? Why am I acting so incongruently from what I really believe? What is it? What is the stimulus? What is the thing going on? What is the stuff that has been controlling me? And it's one thing to recognize what the emotion is, but it's another thing to come back and say, wait a minute, this is who I really am. I want to stop reacting from the emotion. I want to start acting from the value.
Right. Yeah. I think of like, situations where there are children being abused in homes or abusive relationships. Let's take abusive relationships, for example. It's, the partner, let's say the man is saying, well, I just love you so much. That's why I hit you. Right. Like it's this weird, twisted thing. So the values are there, but the emotional sobriety is missing. And so it shows up in this weird, twisted way.
That's exactly right. So let's take it one step farther, Chad, and let's identify in that exact situation. Let's look at the impact it has on the child, and the child grows up. Okay, now what does that child in that situation value? Sometimes that kid comes out and they value independence. I want nothing to do with anybody. I'm going to do my own thing. I know how people can screw you over. Sometimes the kid comes out as an adult and values a strong family. I will never, ever, ever put anybody in a situation like that again. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I grew up in. I'm going to be able to have peace and love and charity and generosity. Kid grows up and comes out of it with, I'm going to value strength. I will never, ever, ever be weak where anybody can ever slap me around again, because I will always be able to defend myself. Or they come out of it and they value. There's all these different ways that these behaviors impact value, and how that impacts me and how that manifests in my own behavior coming out of it. Am I saying that all where it makes sense?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And it also goes to the point. So they don't have the emotional sobriety. The values that they learn from that aren't inherently, the values are agnostic. They aren't inherently positive or negative. We as human beings tend to overly fixate and become myopically focused on how they manifest on the, I call it the topics. We're constantly rearranging the furniture of our life, so to speak, to try to solve the topics. And if we could get to these two things, the values and my emotional sobriety around them, so much would get handled. And this is incidentally one of the things we should be teaching this stuff in school, because we're spending so much time on these subjects to play this old game. There's people even questioning now the value of formal education, college, university, all that stuff, because everything's changing. Just as a total sidebar, but related. I was speaking to someone that we're going to interview on our podcast, who comes from the AI world. And there's this inside of Silicon Valley and sort of the big tech conversations that are going on right now. There's this projection that by 2030, as much as 40% of the jobs that we currently have that constitute the economy, and mostly white collar jobs, not blue collar, things like legal, accounting, that kind of stuff, engineering, computer sciences. I was just reading an article, I think it was in, I don't want to get the magazine or article wrong, so I'm not going to name it, but it was one of those well-known ones, like a Newsweek or a Time or something like that, that was saying, they asked the question, is there even value learning how to become a computer programmer anymore? This has been the heart of the IT world now for 30 years. And now they're saying, do we even need them? And so the idea is that up to 40% of these jobs by 2030 will be done by AI. Now, that I've been saying from a TMIC perspective for a while, this is going to create a mental health crisis, the likes of which we are not prepared for, because people don't know what they value and they have no emotional sobriety to handle what's about to come. Correct. And so this work is so critical. September, it looks like you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, well, there's also the aspect that people don't, like when they're in a profession, they identify with that profession. So then their identity is going to be stripped from them, which creates a whole nother chain reaction of stuff.
Yeah.
So let me, September, what you just said is so crucial. Let me piggyback on that. Whenever I understand, going back to what you just said, putting both of what you guys just said together, Chad, whenever I understand what I value and who I am for my values, and I have created and understood a level of emotional sobriety, my identity is now controlled by me, not where I work.
That's right.
Not what my profession is, not what my family's doing, not what is perceived by the car or the house or the whatever. My identity is me. I understand who I am, regardless of whether I'm in this job or that profession or doing whatever, which is another way of saying I'm no longer going to be the victim. I'm going to be the person that stands on my values and uses my emotional sobriety to control my life, my direction, what's going on. And I'm not going to be the victim by stuff that is changing that I can't control. I'm going to focus on what I can control. And on my values and what my emotional sobriety is.
Yeah. Now you're dead on. I mean, we talk about that all the time, that, there's different ways. The work that we do in TMIC, I look at it very much like a prism, and it's like you can turn it many different ways, but it all goes to the same center. It's just different ways to access it. It's the same body of work. And one of the ways to think about it is our objective is to actually create a context by when we do whole life architecture and that work of whole life architecture to help human beings become more aware of who they are, why they are, and be at the center and the source of their own, taking full responsibility. I say all the time, people don't want freedom. They think they do. They say they do. What they really want is license. They want to be able to do whatever they want without the responsibility that comes with it. True freedom is when you're willing to step in and take full responsibility. And only in that moment are you no longer a victim. But here's the thing: the focus, the focus of where you're looking is not outside yourself, it's inside yourself. You've got to go inside yourself in order to actually no longer be a victim. But too many people are trying to control other people, other circumstances, other variables that are outside of themselves. And it actually just makes you more of a victim, because you're never going to succeed at that game. No one ever has, no one ever will. So the whole thing that we're up to here is helping you get reconnected to yourself, to others, and to nature. That is the core driver. That's our vision for what we're doing. And the way that we do it is by transforming minds and methods. What we're talking about today, when we're talking about the values and the values conversation and the work that you're doing with us, Jeff, and the work that you do with other organizations and individuals, and then the work of emotional sobriety, is to create a perfect 1-2 equation that will allow someone, whether you're a leader in a company or just want to do it for your own life, to no longer be a walking victim in everything that's going on in your life, but actually you will be the driver of your life, because you'll know what you value, and you'll be able to engage with the world from a place of response and not reactivity.
You exactly right. And and everything you said there at the end about whether you're responding or whether you're reacting is so important. And everything that's exactly right. We want people to stand on their own accountability and understanding, self-awareness, emotional sobriety, and the values that create the foundation upon which everything else is built. Because it doesn't matter whether people recognize their value or not, it's there. The values are there. The values are going to be affecting everything. So what we want to do is help you get there and understand what they are, so that it actually starts working for you. Like September was talking about, whenever she became aware of it, how that began to connect the dots and how that began to affect relationships and how that began to do whatever. Absolutely. Which, as you're, and if I were to rephrase that in September, it started to create more emotional sobriety. That became part of the equation of your emotional sobriety and recognition and understanding, even though you already had a great deal of emotional sobriety before you and I ever met. So everything you're saying, Chad, is exactly right.
I'd like to take it a step further, Jeff, and say that the work that we've been doing past just the assessment, the work that you and I have been doing, you've also helped me learn how I express those values, which creates an opportunity for me to say, does this align? Is that how I want to express it? And there's been a few times where you brought it to my awareness that I was expressing the value, but I wasn't expressing it in a way that it was being known or understood, that it was being misconstrued because the lack of emotional sobriety around a particular item. So it all just, there's so many facets to it.
That's a great observation, which again comes back to the power of the blind spot. You are extraordinarily intelligent, emotionally aware, emotional sobriety, and yet I have different eyes, fresh eyes looking at what you're talking about, and you can say something, I can say, okay, so I would suggest X. It's so important to have the support system around you, so important for people to recognize the more that I connect in a community where they can support me and I can support each other, that I can begin to recognize the very stuff that you're talking about, September.
Well, and that's a great segue into, as we kind of look to wrap up here today with this episode, the work that we're doing inside of TMIC for any of you who are listening and watching, if this work intrigues you, or maybe you don't know enough about this work for it to intrigue you, but you know in your own life that you're not feeling high energy, fully full of joy, fully in control of what's going on in your life. You're not getting the outcomes that you want in your business or in your family or in your friendships. It all goes to the same root. I mean, it's this funny thing I've been saying for years, because we tend to kind of, as human beings, try to silo things like, well, this is business and this is my family life and this is my friendship circle. And we've got all of these organizing things. And I step back and I'm like, I just see people everywhere. And wherever you go, there you are, and you're interacting with someone. So if you can start to work on who you're being, then every interaction, forget the context, it's quite irrelevant because human beings are the same no matter the artificial context we try to throw on top of it, right? That's just noise. And so if you want to get to the source of your own personal power, join us over at TMIC. And I know I don't usually, when we do these podcasts, talk about things that are rooted in time, like Thanksgiving or the holidays or things like that, because I don't want to date it, but we have it every year. So I don't really care. We're recording this, Thanksgiving's coming up, Christmas is coming up. And I know with an election year, at least in the United States around the corner, there's going to be a lot of conversation, especially because people get together around those holiday periods where they don't normally maybe see people all the time. They haven't maybe seen them since last year. There's going to be a lot of conversation about politics and about the things going on in our very crazy world right now. And so whether you're watching this, before this Thanksgiving or the next one or 10 years from now, it doesn't really matter to me. The important thing is this. This is the type of work that can make those Thanksgiving, those Christmas, any of those holidays a totally different experience. If you're sitting around the table and an argument is starting to break out over whatever, politics, world events, world issues or something, try to steer the conversation, at least even in your own mind, towards, well, what do I value around this? And what might the other person who has a totally different opinion about the circumstance or the topic, what do they value? And I think, Jeff, just in closing, just say a few words about if we can start to ground ourselves around the values and not the topics, we'll discover that we pretty much all value many of the similar things. I mean, there aren't that many values. I mean, I know there's a lot of ways to talk about it and rephrase it, but at the end of the day, people want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be, they want to, we should be telling the truth. All of these sorts of things. And if we can start to talk from values, then we're going to avoid the arguments and we're going to actually move into a more constructive phase of, well, what can we create? That's what interests me, as you've already told me. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that whenever you combine the understanding of the values and the emotional sobriety, back to what we were talking about earlier, putting it in the setting of around the Thanksgiving table, the arguments are going to happen, guaranteed. We know it's going to happen. Whether we're talking about the conflict in Gaza or whether we're talking about, is it a live Christmas tree or a fake Christmas tree that you put in the house?
Yeah.
The family's going to fight and argue and whatever else. If I understand what I value and I understand my own emotional sobriety, I'm not now going to be triggered or upset or ready to fight the other person across the table. I'm realizing all they're doing is telling me where they're at in their own opinion or in their own viewpoint. That doesn't mean mine is less than. It doesn't mean
right.
I have to defend myself. It doesn't mean that I have to attack you. It doesn't mean that I have to prove that you're wrong. It doesn't mean any of that. All it means is all you've done is tell me what you're thinking and where you're at. Now, because I know what I value and I know my own emotional sobriety and I'm fully aware and more than comfortable in my own skin, I'm not going to react to you, going back to what you said earlier, Chad. Now I'm going to respond to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now we can have a adult conversation, at least half of it. And, unless you really want to fight about whether it's a real Christmas tree or a fake Christmas tree, but one way or the other, I can control what's going on based off my values and my emotional sobriety, where you can't trigger me anymore. You're not controlling me anymore. I'm not being victimized by my own lack of emotional understanding and by your whatever. I'm more than fine with who I am, and I'm more than fine with what you're saying. And bring it on, Uncle Fred. Tell me more about how idiotic it is that people put real trees in houses and how that can burn the house down and how it's whatever, because it's okay. Because you know what? I love you anyway. Why? Because I love myself.
That's
And
right.
because I'm more than okay with who I am. I understand what I value, and I understand who I am from those values, and I understand my own emotional sobriety. And you know what, Uncle Fred? I'm going to love you anyway, regardless of the plaid pants that you're wearing, and the green and red socks that you're wearing, and the shirt that you wear that fit you in a former life that you really shouldn't be wearing anymore, and whatever else. I'm going to love you anyway because I'm okay with who I am first.
Exactly. Yeah. What a great way to wrap up this episode. If any of you are interested in getting plugged into the values conversation and learning more about what we're doing at TMIC to create empowered people around the world who are able to actually come together and work as a community to actually start to push things forward and have a transformative effect, go to tmicglobal.com or themostimportantconversations.com. Until then, Jeff, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us today. September, as always. And we look forward to seeing all of you on the next episode of The Most Important Conversations. Bye-bye.
Go Mizzou.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at tmicglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.